Okay, you're good to go.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order of our Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. I think everybody probably has the agenda to the meeting, so I don't need to review that too much. This is going to be an opportunity to welcome everybody, and we got some new members, which we'll go through an introduction. When you do get called on for introduction, I'd like you to give us a little bit of background why you're here and what you do so that we get to know you a little better. One of the reasons we're getting together today, I think most of you've probably heard, but we did get some funding through the last at the end of the short session that just ended. And we also got a little bit of money from Taylor will explain it more from the previous session. Yes. So we do have some money to work with coming up, and this is kind of a meeting to get us all back on the same page and start moving forward. That being said, my name's Doug Kramer. I'm co-chair with Bruce. I'm appointed to this commission through ODA. I am a farmer in St. Paul, Oregon. I farm in 3 counties. My only crop is blueberries, and I farm with 2 of my kids and a son-in-law. And been farming blueberries since 1980, so it's almost time for me to get out, I think. But anyways, Bruce, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Doug. And just to be clear, we are not co-chairs. You are the chairman or the chair, and I am the vice chair of this commission. I'm the junior partner here, but by agreement, we trade off on managing the agenda items. So I will attempt to live up to Doug's standards. He's much better on the Robert's Rules of Order. My name is Bruce Taylor, and I live in Portland, and I'm appointed by the Fish and Wildlife Commission to represent fish and wildlife habitat considerations here. And I worked for about 30 years for the 2 joint ventures in Oregon, the Intermountain West joint venture east of the Cascades and what is now Pacific Birds west of the Cascades. I worked for Defenders of Wildlife half-time for about 20 years. Currently on the board of the Oregon Desert Land Trust, and on this commission since its inception, I think. 2018, 2017. I don't know, it's been a while, but as close observers know, the money has been slow to show up and coming only periodically. So it feels like we're getting started all over again in some ways here. Looking forward to working with you all.
Then you got to pass it on, I think.
Okay, I'm looking around here. Any of the other, well, I see Russ Hoflick. He's relatively new to the commission, but he's another old timer, so I will just go directly to him.
Thank you, Bruce. Russ Hoflick here. I was appointed by the OWEB board. I have training and background in natural resources. I have from experience, I have 35 years of, sorry, I have construction going on at my house today. I'm retired past vice president nationally for the Nature Conservancy and Oregon director for 35 years and 5 years as executive director, now retired from Thousand Friends of Oregon. And I'll pass it on to Ed.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Ed Contreras. I'm based in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I was appointed by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to represent fish and wildlife values in this commission. And I work for the Intermountain West joint venture. And my work involves supporting capacity to implement bird habitat conservation across Southeast Oregon, primarily in working lands. I'm actually up in Harney County today and just came from a visit on a really neat ranch. It's flood irrigated. It's lots of cool birds out there. So yeah, good to see everybody. And I'll pass it on to Jim Bob.
Jim Bob, you there?
Doug, I think he may have accidentally disconnected instead of unmuting potentially.
Okay. Taylor, why don't you choose someone else? I can't see the list on my screen, so.
Okay, well, let's go
Looks
to.
like he's back, Taylor.
Oh, okay.
I got
you could
scared,
leave
hit the
me
wrong
in.
button. I apologize. So yeah, I'm Jim Bob Collins. I ranch out in Mitchell, Oregon. It's about 60 miles. It sits right dead center between John Day, Oregon, and Prineville. I serve on the SWCC board with Barbara. I am chair of the Wheeler SWCD board. I have also served on Oregon Cattlemen's Association on Partnerscapes, which was a national board that is a landowner-driven conservation deal. That's when I first learned about doing conservation easements. Was visiting Florida back in like 2017, and them discussing their program and stuff. But while I was with that board. We've been farming since my family's been ranching here since 1873. I've been doing this a long time with the main focus, and my family's philosophy was always take care of the grass will take care of you. And that's led me to do a lot of conservation projects on the ranch, to the point that I actually ranch and have a conservation construction business too. And what free time I maybe not have, but sleep is for the weak. So, anyhow. And Barbara, you want to have a go?
Somehow I knew you were going to pick me, Jim Bob. So welcome. I'm really happy to have you on this commission. I am Barbara Boyer. I am the OWEB board liaison, non-voting member on this board. I am a farmer out of Yamhill County, a diversified farm. Barley, silage corn, organic hay, CSA, and my late husband and I took 24 acres out of production in 2002 as an early adopter of the CREP program. So it's been, and we did it organically, which is not something that everybody is doing, and we were glad to make the extra effort along our 4 miles of riverfront on this particular piece of property. So I'm glad to be with you all today. And I do have to dart out at 11, but for a little bit, and I'll sign back on. Laura?
Hi, everybody. Peterson. Still working on my technology a little bit. Hopefully I'll be on video here at some point, but happy to be here. I am an organic vegetable farmer in Multnomah, Clackamas, and Yamhill counties. I was on the ODA board. I served for 2 terms until 2018, and then I was appointed to this commission by Department of Ag. Also have been a longtime director at East Multnomah SWCD, where we started a pilot project for ag easements in 2008. So this all has been a long time coming, and I'm just so excited about the program and the recent funding, and here to help make it work for as many farmers as possible. And I can't see the list, so I'm going to let somebody else pick who's next.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Let's see. Have we gotten all the commissioners?
Amanda, Jeff.
And Jeff.
Oh, Jeff. Yeah, sorry, Jeff.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeff Reimer. I'm a professor of applied economics at Oregon State University. So I'm the just newly appointed by the Oregon State University Extension Service, and I'm based here in Corvallis. I've been at OSU since 2005, and I work in the areas of, I'm basically an agricultural economist, and I got interested in agriculture I grew up on a farm in Illinois. And so farm's still in operation by my brother, corn, soybeans, and we had livestock as well. So I've been around agriculture my whole life, but I'm very much an university professor type. So anyway, happy to be with you here all. And I don't know who, Robin, do you want to go next?
I think we need Amanda. She's a commission member and she's new, and we shouldn't have made you go last, but that means you can go longer to tell us more about yourself.
I don't need longer, but it's good to have a script to follow from everybody else at least. Nick Meisky, good morning. My name's Amanda Lowe. I'm newly appointed tribal representative by the OWEB board. I am working out of Pendleton, Oregon. I also live in Pendleton. I work for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in the Range Agriculture and Forestry Program, implementing the First Foods mission for all of our working lands, resource management. I've been here since about 2016, but I was born and raised in dryland wheat farming and ranching communities. So happy to be here and thankful for the opportunity to represent Eastern Oregon.
Okay, Taylor, you want to have staff go through their
Yeah, I'll go
introductions?
last. I'll kick it to Stephanie.
Good morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Acting Executive Director at OWEB. I'm excited to be here watching my first Oregon Ag Heritage Commission meeting. I've been at OWEB for about 2 years. I started out here as the Deputy Director, and I've been acting since December 1st as Executive Director. Before coming to OWEB, I was at the Oregon Department of Agriculture for about 22 years. My last 2 roles there were as the administrator of the Natural Resource Program area, and before that, the Food Safety and Animal Health Program area. I worked in policy and administration at ODA in several different subject matters. And before coming to ODA, I began my career at the Yamhill and Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. So it's fun to see so many familiar faces here today.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm actually going to kick it over to Nicole, because Nicole also has a bit of an announcement for us.
Hi, everyone. Not so much of an announcement, but Nicole Bettinardi. I'm the executive assistant and supporting this meeting, lurking in the background. I did want to let folks know we discovered that we actually had the wrong Zoom link on our meeting page because we're humans, but we have fixed it. So anybody watching this meeting who would like to participate as an attendee, the Zoom link is up to date now. So I will pass it back to Taylor.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Renee?
Good morning, everyone. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB. I've been with the agency in various capacities since 2007. I haven't reflected on that, so it's been quite some time that I've been with the agency. As of October of last year, we did a bit of reorganization within the agency and created an Acquisitions and Special Programs section that I'm now managing. So that includes the Ag Heritage Program and really does recognize that within OWEB's portfolio, we have multiple land transaction, water transaction programs, and then some other special programs such as post-fire recovery, drought relief, and some programs focused on various aspects of restoration and conservation in the Klamath Basin. So for the last 6 months, I've had the real joy of working with Taylor and Robin. They're just tremendously capable staff. So thank you to them for their patience in bringing me up to speed on OHP. And I'm excited to engage with the commission now. We have some great updates from recent developments, and hopefully we can have a good discussion today and prep for multiple decisional meetings that will be coming in the weeks and months ahead. Taylor, do you want me to kick it over to Robin?
Please, yep.
Hi, everyone. Robin Meacher. I'm the Conservation Easement Specialist for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program at OWEB. I came here in 2022, specifically in this role. And prior to that, I had been at a land trust for just over 5 years doing acquisitions for them. And Taylor, it's back to you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Taylor Larson here. I'm the program coordinator for the Ag Heritage Program, and I've been with the agency since 2001 and in my role as OAHP coordinator since 2022 when we got our first leg of funding. I like to think of myself as a bit of a recovering farmer. I've spent the past decade running a fortune ranch operation with my family down the southern Willamette Valley, and also worked for a while at a watershed council to support my farming habitat or my farming habit before coming to OWEB. So that's me, and just wanted to kind of say that we're super excited to have this commission together. It's been a little while since we've been all in the same, at least virtual room, and this is a chance for us to kind of reorient. This is an informational meeting. We'll likely be meeting relatively soon hereafter, where we can actually make some decisions. But today it's just kind of to reorient, get to know each other, and kind of prime the pump so that when it is time for us to make decisions, we can hit the ground running. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Doug. We are running about 10 minutes ahead. You were right. Maybe we didn't need a full 30 minutes for introductions, but you never know. And I think we're going to move into public comment unless there's other things.
Doug, if I could just suggest maybe Taylor could explain our absent members, who they are for the new people on the commission. We have two, I think, other good members of the commission.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually meant to do that. Thanks, Bruce. That's why you're almost in charge. Okay, so I was just texting with Woody. He's unable to join us. So Woody Wolf, he is a farm and ranch representative appointed by the Board of Agriculture and has been on the commission since 2018. He's out in Wallowa and brings a lot of ranching expertise to the commission. Has been a big part of standing this program up. Also not here is Nancy Duncrack, who's appointed by DLCD. She's been on the commission since 2022 and brings some expertise in land transactions and specifically easements. And so, again, super lucky to have Nancy. Unfortunately, scheduling a meeting on relatively short notice with this many folks, it's hard to get everybody in the room. And finally, we're missing Lois Loop, who's appointed by the Board of Ag, but actually instead of as a farmer and rancher representative, she's there representing agricultural water quality. And so she worked for a long part of her career for the Farm Services Agency and just has a lot of expertise in how these USDA programs tie into folks finding success in farming and ranching. And she's also been on the commission since 2018 and has been a big part of standing this whole program up. So we're sorry not everybody could make it. We'll hopefully now that we may have funding going forward, we'll be able to plan out a little bit further and get everybody here at the same time. So thanks for that reminder, Bruce. I'll kick it back to you guys.
Bruce, you're going to introduce the next topic, right?
Yeah, so a question for the staff here. Do we want to get started on that and then interrupt for public comment, or is it how are we going to address the 10:30 time set?
Well, I might defer to Nicole here, but I think we have everybody who's signed up to give public comment waiting as an attendee. So we could probably just get going with that and then move into the actual agenda following the public comment. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, we've had two folks sign up for public comment and it looks like they're both here. So I can convert them over if you guys are ready.
Let's go ahead with them.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we have Carson and Mark, and Carson showed up first. So if you're ready to jump in, Carson, why don't you tell us what you know?
You. Chair Kramer, Vice Chair Taylor, members of the commission, thank you all so much for being here today. It's so exciting to see this commission meeting again. My name is Carson Kendrick, and I'm the Conservation Program Manager at the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. COLT is a membership organization representing 31 land trusts, soil and water conservation districts, and conservation organizations working across Oregon to protect our habitat and natural spaces, including our working lands. Last year, our members utilized the first round of $5 million in OAHP funding to protect 12,480 acres of working lands across the state. And this year, we are so excited that OAHP has received an additional $5.161 million in funding through the legislature. Our community worked diligently during the 2024 legislative short session to secure this additional funding for OAHP. We emailed and called legislators, attended lobbying days, and provided public testimony during committee hearings. And last October, we also hosted 3 legislative tours to get legislators out on the ground to see the impact of working lands protection at Crown Hill Farms in McMinnville and Full Cellar Farm in Gresham. Our community worked so diligently over the interim and during the short session because there are projects on the line that desperately need this additional state funding. And we found through conversations with our land trust that there is already $7.2 million in obligated federal funds from the Natural Resources Conservation Service for agricultural and ranch land conservation projects. Because this commission is tasked with making funding allocations, we would strongly recommend that you consider prioritizing conservation easements with these grant dollars and prioritizing funding for easement projects that have already dedicated federal match dollars. Because we were unable to secure funding in the 2023 leg session, there are multiple projects across the state that are hanging in the balance. And without this dedicated OAHP funding, these funds could be returned to the federal government for reallocation to other states. Looking forward, COLT is committed to fully funding OAHP through the OWEB budget process. For the 25-27 biennium, we will work with our land trust advocates, legislative champions, and the governor's office to secure dedicated and sustained funding for OAHP. Thank you again for your time and commitment to this program.
Thank you, Carson. Mark, are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Hudson. I am the Land Program Director at Oregon Agricultural Trust, nominally based out of Salem, me working out of Bend. And I first wanted to say that, very excited that we were able to hopefully secure more funding out of this short session here for another slate of projects. One thing that we do ask when looking at funding allocations for those conservation easement projects in particular, that there be a heavy emphasis, as Carson mentioned, on projects with match funding already. Obviously, a project application needs to succeed with, according to OHP's own criteria and goals as put forth in statute. But, our ability as a land trust and our ability as land trusts as a community to kind of maximize our work really is taking advantage of those different federal funding cycles. And due to the lack of funding in the last session, we're one session behind with OAHP funding. So it would mean a lot if that could be an emphasized criteria going forward. The second thing was another processed question going forward. One of the interesting things about what we're kind of still dealing with OAHP is that we're still kind of building the car while we're driving it. Taylor and Robin have done really an admirable job in terms of taking feedback via one-on-ones from ourselves and other member land trusts there at COLT. But there are still numbers or parts of the programs which are kind of vague to our understanding, largely because we haven't gotten there in terms of executing the last rounds. I think as trusts, we haven't, for the most part, gotten to management plan drafting. We haven't gotten to baseline documentation report drafting. And there's still some due diligence and appraisal review stuff that we haven't really participated with the OAHP team. And one thing that we would ask for consideration is that there be more of a regular workshop process in terms of the rules development, or even kind of explaining what the expectations are out of the program. As I said, Taylor and Robin do a great job with the one-on-ones, but we're still kind of finding that there ends up being diffuse or different kind of information or understandings amongst the different land trusts, which is diffusing down to the landowners differently and kind of creating some confusion out there. And also too, we think that a workshopping process would be a lot more efficient in terms of getting the new rules developed or, taking feedback on the new rules development. And a good example is the conservation easement template. There's not a lot of work that can be done until we know what the contract rules are under the conservation easement. That's everything from the appraisals, purchase and sale agreements, the landowner's expectations as to what they're getting into. And, a lot of things were going on. There were some staffing issues, so on and so forth. But it did take us 6 to 7 months to get a conservation easement set of conservation easement template standards put together. And I know from the land trust community, it felt like a reactive process because there was no workshop. Standards were put forward and we all kind of gave our comment on it. But just to sit down at a table with all the people who need to be involved with the discussion, I think could get more expediency. We do only have 18 months, right, to get these things wrapped up. And I think a more informed conversation from everybody, not just what the rules are, but why the rules are written in that way. Because I still think there are things that we need to hammer out. I mean, by way of example, we just heard back from a landowner that they're considering backing out from the last round. And it had to do with the conservation easement requirements. And that was procedurally, because it took very long. And because there wasn't actually set timeline expectations for when we would hear about certain aspects of the conservation easement template being resolved, written, provided, so on and so forth, the landowner ended up being consulted last rather than first. And so I think that's, we need to think about that in terms of writing these new program rules to set ourselves up for success. So anyways, thank you, everyone. And there's the comment.
Well, thank you both. And I'd like to first say thank you, particularly to the Coalition of Oregon Land Trust and the Agricultural Trust for all your work in helping get the legislature to approve funding in this last short session. I know it was Colt's top priority for this session, and I know that the Agricultural Trust was probably the most active among the coalition members in really working this program for the last couple of years. So thank you for helping us to, we hope, have the resources to do some good projects going forward here. Before I check to see if anybody has any questions, I think you raised some good points, both of you, in your comments there. And if Doug's okay, I would ask the staff to talk about those issues and address them when we get to maybe the program refinements item on the agenda, rather than us trying to address them directly as a group here right now. And then that would allow us to move forward. But with that said, if anybody does have any questions for either of our panelists before, actually they've disappeared already. I don't know if they've been cut off from the process, but if there were any, now would be the time to ask. Seeing none, I will pass it back over to you, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And I want to reiterate Bruce's comment on Colt's ability to work the legislative process and get us funding here. I know they were a big part of that, and we really appreciate it. So with that being said, we're going to go on to agenda item C, review the roles of our Agricultural Heritage Commission. And Taylor, you are going to take us through that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so given that we have several new members here and several members that have been on the commission for quite some time and maybe haven't had a refresher as to the exact interface between the commission and the program as a whole, I thought it'd be useful to run through real quick at a high level, what it is that the commission was established to do, and then hopefully leave a little bit of time for discussion so we can just kind of clarify those roles and run a smooth program this year and going forward. So to that end, as staff, we've worked to put together a commissioner handbook, and this is our attempt to kind of get all the information in one place, again, at a relatively high level, so that we're all working from the same set of understandings as to how the program operates and how the commission interfaces with that. So I was just going to kind of run through it real quick and ask that commissioners, stop me as we're going through it to ask clarifying questions. and just be thinking, what would be useful to be included in the commissioner handbook going forward, so that we're all just have a really solid understanding of what our role is. Because my goal is to update this handbook probably yearly, given that we're getting a new crop of commissioners just about every year, and we continue to learn. So with that, it just kind of it sort of starts big picture. What's the purpose of the Ag Heritage Program? And we kind of have these three purposes that interact, right? So we have to increase the economic viability of Oregon's agricultural operations and economic sector, and also reducing the conversion and fragmentation of Oregon's working land, and enhancing fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and other natural resources on Oregon's working land. So those three core purposes kind of guide the rest of what the program does, and guides how the commission and the board invest funds that are deposited into the Agricultural Heritage Fund. And so what's kind of unique about the Ag Heritage Program is that we have a fund associated with the program. The money that goes into that fund is continually appropriated, and we're able to spend money from that fund to implement the program. So the big thing we spend money on to implement the program, obviously, is our grant programs. And then again, money from that fund is used to pay for staff time, administrative expenses, and expenses of the commission. So, sort of at a high level, the role of the commission is to provide guidance to the OWEB board, both through guidance on rulemaking, as Mark was alluding to, and that's something we'll talk about later in the meeting. It's a really important role that the commission has played in the past in establishing our initial rule set, and will continue to play in the future as we continually improve the program and strive to align our rule set with the intention in statute, as well as achieving maximum impact. So we have that. The commission has that rulemaking role, and they also make formal funding recommendations to the OWEB board as to how to invest those grant funds from the Agricultural Heritage Fund. And so those are kind of the two big roles that the commission plays: making rule recommendations and making funding recommendations. And as was kind of made clear in the introductions, the commission is designed to balance representation between the purposes of the program. So it strives to have a balance of agricultural and natural resource interests, and we work really closely with a variety of state boards to appoint commissioners to those seats. So the commission does have 12 members. 4 of those members are appointed by the Board of Ag to represent farming and ranching interests. 1 member is appointed by the director of OSU Extension. We have 2 members appointed by the Fish and Wildlife Commission, who have expertise in fish and wildlife habitat. 1 member, again, is appointed by the Board of Ag, but instead of representing farmer and rancher interests, is there to represent agricultural water quality. And then we have a member appointed by the Land Conservation and Development Commission, who has expertise in conservation easements. And then 2 members that are appointed directly by the OWEB board. So 1 is there to represent natural resource interests, and another is there to represent Indian tribal interests. And so, like I said, I mean, the role of the commission is really to assist with rulemaking and help make funding recommendations. And the commission can also, as we did at our last meeting, appoint any advisory or technical committees that they consider necessary to aid in program development, or just the general performance of their function. So that is at the discretion of the commission itself. I won't talk too much about procedure and logistics, as we have a whole agenda item later in the meeting talking about our upcoming year. But basically, statutorily, we're required to meet at least once a year. But given the workload that is coming up over the coming year and potentially years in the future, that will likely be on a more frequent basis than that. And then the manual goes into the four main grant types that we have as a commission. So I'll just run through those real quick, or as a program. So we make grants to fund conservation management plans, both to develop, implement, and monitor those. And so that grant program is really designed to pay for the implementation of conservation practices that further our purpose, so that maintain or enhance fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, or other natural resources. And then here, in a manner that's consistent with the social and economic interests of the agricultural operator. So the idea is that these plans seek to integrate the needs of the agricultural operation with those of the natural resources that the program's interested in as well. And so we'll talk a little bit more about our plans going forward with that grant program later in the agenda. The second grant program we fund are conservation easements. And again, the reason or the purpose of this grant program is to preserve and protect the continued use of working lands for agricultural purposes and maintain or enhance fish or wildlife habitat, water quality, or other natural resource values on the land. And so it's as Robin can attest to, and our grantees, it's a lift to implement an easement program with a dual purpose. And it makes the program unique and I think really powerful in some ways. And it's also a unique challenge. And so that's just something to call attention to there. So our third grant program is just our technical assistance grant program. And this is a grant program that we haven't run yet, but it's designed to aid organizations that are eligible to enter into either conservation management plans or conservation easements and bringing those projects to a readiness phase. So it's not just a general a TA. These technical assistance grants need to show a direct link to the investment we made and a future development of either an easement or a conservation management plan. And then finally, our fourth grant program is called our succession planning grant program. And this is somewhat of a technical assistance grant program itself, but it's to provide training and support to agricultural landowners or operators, or people who are advising them regarding succession planning for those lands, to help ensure that those lands are continue to be used for agricultural purposes when the land changes ownership. So it's looking at this unique moment in time when a farm or ranch is transferring from one ownership to the next and seeing that as an opportunity to support positive change and facilitate that land staying in agriculture. So those are our four main grant programs, and that's, like I said, a big part of what we do. And so the role of the commission in that is to make those formal funding recommendations to the board. But us as staff are responsible for bringing those completed applications to the commission. So staff will facilitate a grant solicitation. Applicants will submit their applications, and then we'll facilitate a technical review process where we'll put together review teams. They'll evaluate the applications based on the evaluation criteria that the commission has helped establish and rule. And then those technical review teams will rank the applications. And then us as OWEB staff will try and synthesize those evaluations and rankings and bring those to the commission, and facilitate a discussion and ultimately that formal funding recommendation that the commission makes to the OWEB board based on what funds are available in the Ag Heritage Fund. And then finally, the OWEB board makes the actual awards for those grants. And so that's kind of the process there. And that at a high level is the role of the commission. So I do want to leave a little bit of time, since nobody stopped me for clarifying questions, to kind of talk through that and answer any questions people might have. And I knew I could count on Russ to have a question. So Russ, go ahead.
Taylor, thank you, and I apologize if you hear any construction in the background. That was a really, really good summation. I guess one of the concerns I have, and I really would look forward to having this as a upcoming agenda item, one of the priorities is to have continually appropriated funds to be able to meet this audacious mission. And I'm concerned that I haven't seen on any agenda yet, what are the exact needs that are out there? If you look at the mission and all 36 counties and all farmers and ranchers that are in a position that could influence the mission of the organization, we need to get the zeros correct. And we all lived through the struggles to get the first $5 million appropriation and the follow-up $5+ million appropriation. And I fear that we are not properly articulating the full scope of the financial need that is out there. I believe that if we sit down and go through a professionally assessed review, that we're talking about something in the scope of hundreds of millions of dollars per year. But we need to get the zeros correct, and I'd like to have staff lead us through that effort to really get that number correct. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Russ. Yeah, let's do some further thinking on that front and how to make that a useful endeavor.
And Taylor, I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, great.
And if this is too far off topic, we can put it someplace else. First off, have on the list of needs for the program, is habitat migration listed on that as far as like qualifying requests to do on a conservation easement?
Migration itself isn't called out specifically, but I mean it's somewhat implied by enhancing the fish and wildlife habitat.
I mean, I know this is kind of extreme, but when we were touring Florida and looking at that, of course, you're on a peninsula versus the state of Oregon is vastly different, but that's where they had fallen into, where the property had been so privatized and then encroached in so much that they had a massive migration issue happening there. And I could see different parts of the Willamette Valley maybe starting to bottleneck into different places like that. So I could see that being an important thing to designate out and make sure that is a priority. But then my other part of it is could maybe, if this, again, if we need to talk about this some other time, or maybe just pull me off the side and educate me, would be great. What's the goal of the conservation management plan aspect of this? What is that part of the process into building out a conservation easement for a landowner, or what is the goal of the management plan?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's been a point of confusion early on in the program. But so the conservation easement is separate and distinct from the conservation management plan grant program, and in fact, in statute, it specifically calls out that they need to be evaluated separately. And so the easement side of things is basically, us as a program funding the purchase of certain development rights on a piece of working land, such that we guarantee that it stays available for farming and ranching. Where on the conservation management plan side of things, our goal is to pay for the implementation of conservation measures that are going to set up that farm or ranch for success in the long run. And so it's our way to incentivize certain agricultural practices that are going to hopefully increase the economic viability of the operation and enhance the fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, or other natural resources over the long run. And those plans, in order for us to pay for the implementation of them, need to have a 20 to 50 year planning horizon. So but there's no restrictions placed on the land itself. So it's a less restrictive way to engage with a farmer or rancher on implementing a long-term vision for their place without having to actually sell development rights.
Right. I guess when I hear that, I envision what SWCDs do, and that would be a perfect tool to put in an SWCD's toolbox and to have OWEB allocate those funds that way. Because this sounds to me like it's a great idea. I'm not going to say that it's not by any means, but it seems like as far as the Ag Heritage Program, this may be taking away funds that we could be doing more easements and doing more as far as like the workshops and doing some more stuff that way. What could be used with that, but I would love to see that move to an SWCD where they're having that and they're implementing it, and having them be a partner as far as like boots on the ground type of relationships.
Yeah, and that's actually how the program is designed to work. So I didn't mention this, but we're the grant, we make the grant fund, but the conservation management plan is held by a plan holder, and that is designed to be like an SWCD or potentially a watershed council or even a land trust, who's the plan holder.
Yeah.
And we're just funding the development of that plan and then the implementation, but the plan holder is the one who's actually engaged in doing the work and monitoring the implementation of the plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Jim Bob, I'm Doug Kramer. I was involved when we passed the legislation and the organization of this whole thing. And really what the hot topic was back then was the sage grouse issue and the management plans that were required for ranchers because of the sage grouse. And so that was historically, that was the reason these management plans were part of this whole program. And since then it's expanded to other things also, which it should, but that historically that's where this started at. So
I can totally understand why that would be that way. I mean, when I cut my teeth on this when I was in my mid-20s was working with SWCD doing creek buffering and things like that. So if someone would have come to me in that same process of getting to know your good neighbor that an SWCD should be, that's educating you on what you could do, which I wouldn't want to see an Ag Heritage Program in place until they understand what good conservation looks like, as far as like having a symbiotic relationship with your working landscape. So that's where I understand this fully, and I see that this is being kind of like a platform to step forward and like, hey, how are you doing this on a scale before we can actually award you a conservation easement that would make sense for the landowner and for the state. But it's just interesting how it's called out here. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I see, Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to go back to Russ's point, and I don't think we need to find an answer here, but I just wanted to put it out there just so I don't forget it. I'm sure Russ won't, but I was wondering whether, our technical assistance dollars, to the extent we allocate any of those, could be used to fund someone to do an assessment of need. And we've never talked about program planning in a proactive way here, like how much do we need? It's always, well, we'll sit here and wait for the money, see if they give us any scraps of money to feed the program, when we might be in a better position to get more money if we were able to talk in an informed way about what program demand or needs are out there. So just something to be thinking about, and then thank Russ for raising the issue.
Yeah, appreciate that, Bruce. I think, the TA grant itself probably wouldn't be a good fit for that, because like I mentioned, those grants need to lead directly to a specific conservation easement project or conservation management plan project.
Okay.
But I'd kick it over to Renee maybe to talk about, would it be possible to spend some of those administrative funds to more fully understand the program need, if that were something that the commission wanted to do in the long run?
Yeah, thanks, Taylor, for that. And I do think potentially on the operation side of the funding that would be possible. I tend to agree with Taylor without pulling up the TA rule set and dissecting it on the fly. I don't know that that is a great fit, but potentially if we need more of a structured assessment, we can explore that, I think, in the meantime. And we can talk about this a little bit more during the legislative and budget update, because I can talk a little bit about some of the plans for 25-27 biennium, and I'm sure Stephanie will chime in. But I do think figuring out how we can leverage maybe on more quick turnaround timeline. Some of the work of local partners, for example, the great work that Colt and Carson just talked about, the summary that they were able to provide of known need out there already. I do think that there may be ways for us to have some communication to more fully put our arms around that. I don't think, Russ, it would be as structured and formal a process, but I think to try to get at some of those quantifiables in the near term and keep discussing with this commission what it might look like, what funding sources might be like to get to that, I think, bigger picture, longer view summary of what the true need is out there across the different programs, conservation easements, CMP development and utilization, succession planning for that matter, and farmland transition. So I think that we can explore that, but as staff, we'll take a closer look at the current rule set for TA just to confirm one way or another. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Okay, well, we are running a couple minutes behind. I don't want to take over the facilitation roles from our chair and co-chair, but perhaps we want to move on to program refinements if there are any further questions.
Okay, so without any further questions, let's go ahead and move to the next topic on our agenda. And Renee, you are the one to lead us through it.
I think you're skipping one ahead, Doug. I think we're going to go to D, which is 2024 program refinements.
Oh, I'm sorry, and that is Bruce.
Okay, well, I would ask Taylor and Robin, let's step up and jump into program refinement.
And I'll kick it over to Robin to start us off.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to do my best not to regurgitate what was written in the staff report on this, but we did want to touch on a couple highlights as we worked through refining the program requirements, documents, processes built off of the learning that we've had since doing our initial solicitation in 2022, and then through that evaluation and award process that went into 2023. So as some of the commission knows, we did have a committee established by the commission to essentially work with staff by looking at the application process and the application itself. So we did work through that in 2023 and met in May, so shortly after the commission meeting, where staff presented certain updates that had been made to the application that we were considering based off of our learning and evaluation, and then the commission's deliberations of the 2022 projects that came through the program. And in that process, we came through learning not only things for the application, but also commission's interest and some of our local partners' interest in having greater clarity around the program guidance, including application guidance, as well as guidance into program administration. So we've worked on making refinements not only to the application based off of trying to solicit the information that tracks the most closely with the evaluation criteria identified in rule, that being based off of some of the information we heard from technical reviewers and the commission on what type of information would be most useful for using those evaluation criteria. And then we also have made additional refinements and created additional support to explain what we expect in terms of the information we're asking for in the application. So that is required documentation, including maps, information that helps us understand the justifications for the estimated purchase price, and then also expectations on due diligence items that are submitted with application. And so some of the goals for that was to standardize the information that we get across the board from applicants, and to be able to give our applicants upfront an expectation of what we're looking for when they do submit those documents. So both standardization and then also trying to track the information as well as we can, and give heads up to our potential applicants about what we'll be looking for as we review the applications. And then just to touch a little bit on the committee did focus quite a bit on the application, but there's a whole suite of programmatic documents that we produce that kind of helps guide how the program is administered. And so that is, of course, the application and application guidance, but then the program guidance kind of stems into those expectations on what happens when a grant is funded. And so that, I think, the revisions we've made there in spelling those out can really help express to our applicants what those expectations on due diligence items post-award look like. So those final documents that are submitted to OWEB that are reviewed throughout the grant process, and then also gives expectations on just OWEB grant requirements that are consistent with our statutes, our rules, and our policies. And so we really have worked on refining that and producing that to have it available to folks prior to the next solicitation cycle, so that those expectations of not only what we're looking for in the application process, but also post-award are available for folks prior to applying to the program. I think with that, I will leave it there for the conservation easement program. And Taylor, if you want to touch a little bit on any refinements to conservation management plan and technical assistance, but also happy to answer questions from the commission.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yeah, I'll just touch on the CMP and TA stuff real quick. And just kudos to Robin. I mean, Robin's put in a ton of legwork on taking this program to the next level. We're super lucky to have her on board. So with that, yeah, so in addition to this conservation easement revisions, we are making a few changes to the conservation management plan and technical assistance grant offerings. And a lot of that is in response to the $750,000 that the Ag Heritage Funds will be receiving to pay for the development and implementation of conservation management plans that have a carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions reduction benefit. And so Renee is going to be talking more in the next agenda item about the legislative and funding piece that's associated with this. But just from the programmatic side of things, that funding comes with a few strings attached to it that we're happy to do. But it does change our process a little bit. So we are going to be conducting an outreach process as part of distributing these funds in order to gather input from tribes, environmental justice communities, and other partners as to how these funds could be most effectively used by those communities. And so then based on the results of this outreach, we'll open conservation management plan and TA applications. And the solicitation is going to be updated to include questions that help us understand the potential carbon sequestration benefits of the proposed projects. And so the other big kind of programmatic change, aside from the outreach, which is going to push the solicitation timeline back a certain amount, and we'll obviously incorporate feedback we get through that outreach process, will also be allowing for the folks to apply for both the development of a conservation management plan as well as the initial implementation of that plan in a single application. So if you remember last time, we only funded the development of conservation management plans with the idea that in the future we would have funding available for their implementation. But given the urgency associated with these climate dollars that are coming into the program and the desire for impact, and just wanting to be able to commit to the folks that we fund, that they aren't just going to be planning for planning's sake. we're designing this next round of applications to allow for folks to, like I said, fund both the development of the plan and then the initial implementation. So that's a big change on that front. And with that, yeah, would love to take questions or comments from the commission on what's changing for 2024.
Okay, seeing no questions, now we will go to the legislative and funding.
Laura's got one. You almost got that.
Jeez.
Sorry, Doug, couldn't help myself. All right. Thank you, Taylor. And Robin, I know I've heard this analogy many times from Mark today about other people that we are building this as we're driving it. So I appreciate that and all the work you all have put into this since we last met. I think I just wanted to hear if there was any response to some of the issues that Mark raised. Are there more improvements still in the works for the application? Are there going to be more opportunities for stakeholders to be included in conversations, formal comments, workshopping? Is there more organized outreach about the application? And just any responses to where there appears to be still some confusion from some of the partners.
Taylor, do you want me to chime in?
Sure, go for it.
On that, yeah. Thanks for the question, Laura. So I would say yes, and on multiple fronts. So I think one is I appreciate the comments from Colt and Oat in the letter and what Mark underscored in terms of how can we have just more regular communication as we're in the midst of project implementation to gain learnings. And I mean, I will take some responsibility for probably some of the fits and starts, given that we created a new section and a new manager came in, and I was asking questions about, let's think about the statutory foundation for this program relative to maybe some of the things that we borrowed from elsewhere as we were quickly standing the program up. So I feel as though we've been able to hear and respond to some of that feedback. And as Mark said, we haven't worked with grantees through a baseline development, a management plan development. So we are going to inevitably have more learnings. And so I think figuring out what that right cadence is, certainly Robin and Taylor will be engaging at the project level. And I think determining, what does kind of a roll up periodic communication look like so we can get some of those things out on the table. I think in the more immediate associated with solicitations, certainly as we are launching any next cycle, for example, with easements, and I'll talk shortly about that funding, we will be doing webinars and trainings and having pre-application consultations as desired. So that I think will help with some of that proactive transparency, building on what Robin described in terms of program materials, trying to be clearer on what the expectation is, what are the rules of the road, where might there be some confusion. And then I do think and we'll talk about this also later in an agenda item, as we move into the rulemaking process, when the commission then kind of puts its hat on as the Rules Advisory Committee to the OWEB board for rule revisions, that is a very open public process. You all will be chewing on what do we need to clarify in rule? What didn't we anticipate? I think to Mark's question of not just what the rule says, but what it means, that will take a village, given that it was 7 years ago that those initial rulemaking conversations were happening. So I think having the space to sit with this group, get public input during the RAC process, to really reflect on what is working, what we need to refine, and reground ourselves in some of those why we even structured it in that way at the outset, and what have we learned. So hopefully, Laura, that gives a sense of the ways that staff have been thinking about how to potentially address some of the really important feedback we're hearing, and we're open to feedback, obviously, from the commission about how we can continue to kind of lean in on that need.
Hey, Renee,
That's great, Renee. Oh,
one more
thank
question.
you.
Renee, in the Colt letter, they mentioned the application portal issue where last time around somebody got frozen out. Is that a technical fix or something that can be addressed before the next round? Or
Yeah, so this is where I'll play the I wasn't here during that, and so I'm basing this on my understanding of the system, and I do think that we can explore, was there an issue with an upload being in the wrong format and the system saying, I don't understand that, so we need to run down that piece of it. As I saw the feedback in the letter from Colt and Oat, what this prompts me to think is we as a funder do have to have deadlines of some sort from an equitability across the board. And I think what this prompts for me, and I've talked just a bit with Taylor and Robin and Stephanie too about it, is I think we need to have a process by which days in advance we are working with applicants to see how things are going, not 30 minutes in advance, because that is a sprint that oftentimes, if you're uploading a large file, it may not work. You may not be able to solve it in 30 minutes, but I think we can put some continuous improvement into that piece of how do we have much more close communication with applicants days before we're hitting a deadline, so we're clear on where the system and an upload or whatever the case might be might not be talking to one another.
thank you. And I see Laura has her hand up.
Well, I just had one more question, and maybe this is for the next section, but since the climate dollars are paying for the management plans, does that mean that all the general fund dollars go to easements, or when and how does that decision get made?
Can we hold that, Laura, to the, I think probably the next item, and then also the work plan discussion?
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions here? I'll pass it back over to Doug for legislative and funding, I think is next.
Yep. This is the third time, so it's going to be the charm, right? We're going to move to agenda item E, legislative and funding update from Renee.
Thank you, Chair Kramer. For the record, Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager. So we have some exciting developments to talk about here. So I will start with an update about funding that came through House Bill 3409, focused on natural and working lands. We will also talk about the end of session funding that was incorporated into Senate Bill 5701 with the session that just ended. The outcome of that is fantastic news, and I do want to note that the bill is still under review by the governor. So she has not yet signed the bill, so we are still speaking in tentative terms around the 5701 funding until that bill is signed. So we'll start with House Bill 3409. Taylor talked a bit about that. I'll give some additional background. I'll try to keep us out of the weeds, but certainly happy to answer questions. So that House bill was passed during the 2023 legislative session. It funded a whole host of different climate initiatives. So one element of that bill was development of a natural and working lands fund, for which OWEB, the agency, was tapped to be the overall fiscal agent. That fund has $10 million within it, but the bill also created 4 sub-funds within that. And those individual funds are attached to specific agencies to take those dollars and make investments that have carbon sequestration benefits or greenhouse gas emissions reduction benefits. So the 4 agencies are Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Forestry, and OWEB. So we are both fiscal agent for the big fund, and we actually have one of the sub-funds for which we're responsible. So for that OWEB sub-fund, The bill does specifically state that the agency shall use the Natural and Working Lands Fund to provide incentives for practices that support natural climate solutions. That's one. And also provide financial support for technical assistance for activities that would, again, ultimately get at natural climate solutions. It does also state that priority for these expenditures will be given for technical assistance to environmental justice or EJ communities or tribes, and also incentives for programs or activities that are supported by an EJ community or a resolution of a tribe. So a focus lens on natural climate solutions, and then some additional specific attention to EJ considerations and tribal considerations. So ultimately, the House bill required that the Oregon Climate Action Commission, which previously was the Oregon Global Warming Commission, would work with the agencies to develop the programs for implementation of those 4 sub-funds. So the governor's office worked with the 4 identified agencies starting in 2023 to develop a proposal that articulates how the 4 agencies would, for each of their sub-funds, propose to use those natural and working land dollars. Those were presented to the Climate Action Commission back in December and January. And ultimately, OWEB for our sub-fund was both requested and was granted $2.5 million. $750,000 of that is specific to OAHP. And within that $750,000 allocation, it is specific to either the conservation management plan planning and implementation bucket, and or the TA bucket. So across our 4 opportunities for funding, you have 2 places that you could propose to utilize that $750,000. The remaining funding will be utilized in other OWEB open solicitation offerings. So at the April OWEB board meeting, we'll be requesting that the board approve receipt of that $750,000 specific to OHP to basically get it into the board's spending plan. And then soon after the April board meeting, we would be coming to this commission to talk through you all setting a spending plan for this biennium. So one piece of that is the $750,000. An important part that Taylor mentioned also is because of the focus on EJ communities and tribal interests, OWEB as an agency will be conducting extensive outreach to make sure we are receiving input from tribes, from EJ communities for the purposes of the OHP funding, from land trusts, from agricultural organizations, so that we can make sure to meet the statutory expectations of those natural and working lands funds. We can have that be informed by the input we received around EJ tribal interests, and then offer CMP and or TA grant offering solicitations that really reflect the intention of those dollars to get work on the ground and apply the tribal and EJ lenses. So that was a lot on House Bill 3409, and I know I talk quickly. So Chair Kramer, would you like me to pause here for questions about this piece before we talk about the end of session bill, or finish everything and then open it up for questions?
Let's take questions on this part of it now, and I agree.
Okay.
Anybody?
Looks like Russ has a question.
Renee, thank you. This is extremely helpful. Good summation of the program. I guess one question I do have is the sequence. Will this parallel the other timelines that the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program will have to be able to possibly leverage other federal funds or other private funds?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Russ. So I would say with the $750,000 in natural and working lands funding, given that that is focused on basically CMPs and technical assistance and outreach is required, my thinking as staff would be that would, one, require a slower track because outreach will take time. And then we will need to make refinements to the program before launching any CMP or TA offerings. And depending on the desire of the commission in terms of how other funding might be slotted into different line items within the OHP offerings, for example, conservation easements and covenants, you may have those on different tracks because we may want to get something moving more quickly on non-federal match that easement projects could provide to existing ASAP AO, rather than slow that down while critically important outreach is happening on CMP and TA. That is just a staff response, but clearly that's a discussion with the commission.
It looks like Amanda has her hand up too.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if there was already a ranking criteria established for awards or if that's still forthcoming, and if there will be commission input on what that ranking criteria should be for those awards.
And Amanda, just to be clear, you're talking about specific to
the House bill, please.
Conservation Management Plan. And TA Taylor, do you want to talk a bit about what we
sure
currently have in place? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have in our existing rule set the set of evaluation criteria that all conservation management plan applications and TA applications, but they're separate, are evaluated against. And so what we're looking to do with this climate money is potentially adding an additional lens that we look at those applications through, on kind of layering that on top of our existing evaluation criteria. And that's how applications would be evaluated and brought to the commission within this next round. Not to confuse things, because we are going to talk about this in a future agenda item, but over the coming year, we're also, as we've alluded to, going to be working with the commission on refining our rule set. And so there will be an opportunity for the commission to tweak the evaluation criteria that we have in order to better get at the goals of the program. Those two things are going to be happening at the same time, in the spirit of building the car as we're driving it. So we're going to be running one cycle with the old evaluation criteria while we're developing the new evaluation criteria that will apply to future cycles. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And it looks like Ed has a question as well.
Yeah, Taylor, I may have missed it, but the House Bill 3409 funding. So just so it's clear,
yeah,
the 750,000 can be used for direct payments for climate smart practices, carbon sequestration, and only for that. And so we have conservation management plans that may have other practices, but that funding for that House bill cannot pay for performance of any other ecological benefits on those other plans.
It could pay for the implementation of climate smart practices and the associated technical assistance that would potentially lead to the implementation of those practices. But it specifically cannot pay for conservation easements.
Is there a suite of practices that have been identified at this point?
I'm glad you asked. We have an agenda item coming up next where we're going to be talking through those.
I'll stop.
Been working hard on that, but yeah.
Chair Kramer, are you comfortable with me transitioning to 5701?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Okay, thanks. So Senate Bill 5701 was the end of session bill for the short legislative session that just wrapped up, as noted in the staff report. That bill does include just over $4.5 million in grant funding for the Oregon Ag Heritage Program. So again, very exciting time. I noted that the bill still is under review by the governor, so we will continue with staff to keep checking status of that. And again, just huge thanks to the program proponents that really helped to effectively communicate to legislators about the very important, the highly critical nature of this funding to support the on-the-ground work in which you're involved with agricultural landowners. So as with the $750,000 in Natural and Working Lands Fund, we will be taking as staff a request to the OWEB board that, as long as the governor signs 5701, we would ask that they approve receipt of the $4,541,680 in additional new grant funding for Oregon Ag Heritage Program, get that into the overall OWEB spending plan, and then turn over responsibility for considering how both the Natural and Working Land $750,000, the just over $4.5 million in new legislative funding would be distributed or allocated across the 4 possible buckets that OAHP has for granting. So conservation easements and covenants, conservation management planning and implementation, technical assistance, and succession planning. So Taylor will talk more about this in agenda item I. Will be taking that request to the board at their April 22 to 24 meeting next month, and then we intend to convene the commission shortly thereafter, so you can have the conversation about setting a spending plan. We would expect, and I think as has happened previously, you would be weighing input about different funding needs that you understand exist out on the landscape, and discuss options relative to those needs and some of the demand that exists. One piece that I'll just briefly clarify, there was mention in the letter from Colt and Oat about the commission didn't set a spending plan until after applications came in. That isn't exactly correct. You had set a spending plan. You amended your spending plan after applications came in, and you could see what the demand was. So we will ask this commission to set a spending plan so that folks know what they're aiming towards. Would you put everything into conservation easements? Would you put some portion into that, some portion into TA, just so that we have a sense of what those sideboards are? But then, not unlike what happened during the 23 decisional meeting, if you see demand higher in some areas and lower in others across those grant offerings within OHP, you can amend your spending plan to adjust accordingly. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. And then in terms of the 25 to 27 budgeting process, it was mentioned earlier during public comment, and Stephanie, I'll make a few comments, but then please chime in. So we are in the midst of providing early information to the governor's office and Department of Administrative Services about potential agency requests for the 25-27 biennium. The budget process is being refined a bit to have earlier interface with the governor's office and DAS on potential program needs. Obviously, OAHP is one of those within the OWEB portfolio. And I think Stephanie pulled up some information from the last budgeting process. We had actually partnered with some of the grantees and project proponents, program proponents, to help gain exactly what you were talking about, Russ, a better estimate of what is the demand out there on the ground. And Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about what I know you found with the letter of intent?
Yes, and this predates my time with the agency, but a letter of interest process was done in 2018 that OWEB led, and that process documented $66.9 million in conservation easement funding needs. So that was something that we included in our agency request budget document for the 23 to 25 process.
And so again, that's casting beyond where we are currently with the funding that you all will be putting into a spending plan, but just wanted to make sure, given the reference to future funding needs, that we touched on where we are in the budgeting process, looking to next biennium, and that we could leverage some of the past work to help get at some of those needs that might exist there for future years. So with that, happy to take questions about either end of session funding or any other topics that are on commissioners' minds.
Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. The operations fundings you're getting out of the end of session bill, $619,000. That's for the rest of this biennium, I assume. And is that what you need? What is it? Is it going to cover all the staff? Or are you going to hire additional staff? What's the plan for use of those dollars?
Yeah, so I would say, Bruce, it rounds out the needs for this biennium. It does cast forward a bit into 25, 27. This is some of the challenge, and obviously Stephanie chime in as needed. This is some of the challenge of the inconsistent nature of the funding coming in. Is it now we are whole through this biennium. It has us starting into next biennium. It does not get us through next biennium. So a lack of a consistent investment makes for the need for periodic influxes of resources on the operation side in the same way that it does on the granting side to provide more consistency. But yes, Stephanie, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think I'm just restating what Renee said, basically, that when we know that we can have up to 12% of funds deposited into the Ag Heritage account for administration, and we don't know when our next tranche of administrative funding is going to come in, we use what we need during the current biennium, and then we carry over that future administrative funding for because the work associated with the grants spans beyond the length of the biennium. And so, as Renee said, that's the challenge, and that's the strategy that we have available to us, is to be able to use that 12% of the funding for current biennium and future biennium needs. And then until we have it built into our regular budget, that's the best strategy that we have available to us.
And I would just say to Taylor and Robin, I hope you view this as employee retention sort of stuff, that, that's an important thing. I think especially those of us on the commission who've been around here for a while understand the importance of having staff that knows the program and keeping good staff in place, despite the fact that, it's a biennium to biennium or mid-year to mid-year, sometimes a little bit tenuous, but people are trying to look out for you.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Bruce.
Any further questions? Bruce, I think you're up on the next topic.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to remind myself of the title here, but I'm going to pass it over to Taylor and Barbara Weiss. But we're talking about, this is where we've been talking about this subject. Renee's been talking about it for most of her career, I think. And it's a very thorny set of issues there. But how do you actually pay people? How do you calculate what you pay people when you talk about payments for ecosystem services, i.e. conservation management plan implementation? So Barbara has been working on this for a while, and we're looking forward to hearing from you all.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, and I think you did a pretty good job of setting that up. I mean, basically, we are authorized to run a conservation management plan grant program that includes not only the development of that plan, but then the implementation of that plan. And so how we go about implementing is a little bit, has been up to the commission, and the commission decided way back in the day that we were going to take a a payment for ecosystem services approach when we're determining how we value the implementation of practices associated with a conservation management plan. So in that effort, we've been engaged with Barbara and Highland Economics since I think 2019. They completed a review and feasibility determination of different methodologies available for valuing agricultural conservation management activities. And sort of based on that, we have kind of chosen an approach, a payment for practice approach that Barbara is going to describe, and have been working on developing an actual methodology that's going to guide the development of guidance material and the way that we engage with both conservation management plan holders and the operations associated with those plans, and make those long-term investments in conservation practices. And so Barbara's going to give us kind of an overview of where we're at with the draft of the implementation methodology. We're going to hopefully have a bit of a discussion here with the commission, solicit some feedback, incorporate that feedback, and then at our early May meeting, which Renee was alluding to, we'll have Barbara back to give us kind of an update on what is hopefully a final draft by that point in time, so that we can run a solicitation with an existing methodology, which is a really exciting place to get to, because there's been a lot of legwork going into this. So with that, I will kick it over to Barbara to kind of to run us through some slides and talk through the kind of the framework for our payment for practice methodology, and then we'll leave plenty of time for discussion and questions and feedback. So yeah, with that, take it away, Barbara.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Taylor, and you too, Bruce. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. As Taylor mentioned, I've got some slides. Great. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Fantastic. So just wanted to start with a little bit of introductory. It's been a while since we talked about this. So the objectives that we developed together with OHP agency staff, as well as with numerous conservation leaders in the state. So the goals for the methodology include being easy and inexpensive to implement. We just talked about administrative costs. We're trying to keep those low for this program. Transparent and easy to understand. So we'll see how well, as I go through this today, you think if it hits that easy to understand. Certainty for landowners so that they know what to expect and what the payments will be, but also flexible and adaptable to diverse farms and practices. And then having payment values actually be commensurate with what the value to the public is of the ecosystem services provided. And then finally, being consistent with NRCS conservation practice definitions. So those were pretty big group of objectives to try to meet with the methodology. So as Taylor mentioned, we did several years ago a feasibility analysis to look at which benefits could be quantified and valued. And both through that process, as well as hearing from conservation managers and planners around the state, we landed on water quality, terrestrial habitat, aquatic habitat, and carbon sequestration as the 4 types of benefits that were valued in this methodology. This methodology was structured and set up before it was known what the funding would be. So we recognize that the funding right now is carbon focused, but the methodology encompasses all 4 of those benefit types. So it's focused on benefits, valuation based on benefits, but it's a payment based on the practice. So we're focused on the outcomes that are provided by the practices. So it's based on projected environmental impact and the value of those impacts. But it is not a monitoring program. Second, we're keeping costs low, and that's monitoring is really expensive, so we're not including monitoring in the program. Another reason why it's practice-based and as a set payment is to provide that certainty and ease of understanding for landowners. So when you measure versus having a set payment up front that people know what to expect, it can really lead to uncertainty for program participants. And it can also, you can have some practices that can take years to achieve. And so you could have a real disconnect between implementation of a practice and the costs being incurred for that practice and actual payments. So these are the reasons why we're focusing on benefits and outcomes, but we're making the payment based on implementation of the practice itself. So there's sort of 3 steps that we took in developing the methodology. The first one is identifying which practices will be eligible. And this is based on, we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but based on NRCS physical effects rating system for which practices provide the biggest environmental benefit for habitat, carbon, and water quality. Second, we quantify that environmental benefit. So if you do no-till agriculture, what is the actual carbon change in the soil? What is the runoff in terms of water quality and sediment? What is any other environmental benefit that we're looking at of any of the practices? So that required extensive literature review. I think we have like 10 pages of sources in the methodology background report. The third piece is, what is the economic value? And as Bruce said, this is very thorny and tricky. The environmental benefit is hard, and the economic value can be even more challenging. But we use a variety of methods to come up with an economic value with the aim to be fairly conservative and what those economic values are, recognizing kind of the early nature of this program and really the sort of trailblazing nature. There are almost no payment for ecosystem services programs like this around. So we're really kind of doing some pioneering work here that you all have set in motion. So what's the methodology look like? So first thing is, which practices are eligible? So we talked about the NRCS effects rating. So there's 167 conservation practices within the NRCS that they have defined. They rate this from a scale of 5 being the most effective and beneficial to a -5 where it actually causes a worsening on different parameters. In general, they rate based on water quality, habitat, carbon, air quality, water quantity and conservation, soil health, livestock productivity, and plant productivity. Those are kind of the categories that are within this physical effects rating matrix that NRCS has produced. We're focused on the first 3 in blue: water quality, habitat, and carbon. For carbon, we talked about those 3 steps of which practices are eligible, what do they do for carbon in terms of sequestration, and what's the value of that. So this table kind of summarizes those 3 steps. The column on the far right lists the eligible practices. There are 14 practices that rate either a 3, 4, or 5, so the most effective in the NRCS effectiveness rating. That matches up really well with the literature, those practices that rate highly, which you would expect, right? The NRCS is basing it on the research that's been done on effectiveness of these practices. We have separated these practices into 2 different types. One are in-field practices like conservation cover or no-till management versus habitat-based practices that are more edge-of-field practices that are establishing grassland, tree shroud habitat, or wetland habitat. The literature is different for these, for habitat-based versus in-field practices. So based on review of available information and also sort of cross-checking with some of the tools that are available from Department of Agriculture, like Comet Planner, that estimate carbon, that are also based on all the literature sources that we reviewed. So looking at all those sources, the second column in this table, the tons C per hectare per year, which is often how it's reported in the literature, that's the estimated carbon on an annual average basis that we're using for the methodology. The next column converts that to CO2 equivalent per acre per year. So it's just, converting that same value, doing tons of CO2 instead of just carbon per acre instead of hectare. The next column is the value per ton. So There are a lot of values out there for carbon. The highest values per ton that you see are based on carbon, the cost to society of an extra ton of carbon in the atmosphere. We went with a fairly conservative value that's based on payments for plant-based sequestration, which is what we're doing within this methodology. So the value per acre per year for each practice is in the right column, where if you had an infield practice, it would be eligible for $5 per acre per year. If it scores a 3, 4, or 5 in the NRCS physical effects rating. If you did 2 practices, you could get $10 on that same acres, you could get $10 per acre per year, and so forth. As I'm going
pause for clarifying questions as we go, Barbara?
Yeah, I was just going to say, anybody got any questions? Okay. Yeah, Russ, it looks like you do.
Yeah, I do. This is really helpful. On the eligible practices under the soil sequestration, I'm noting that you don't have reduced grazing. If you talk about stubble height being managed to a particular level to protect root integrity and vegetation management, I'm surprised that's not listed as an eligible practice.
Yeah. So there are several practices that we expected to be rated highly. That another one that you don't see there is cover cropping. So there's several practices that in the physical effects rating didn't come out high, or that the literature. So we tried to stay really consistent with the physical effects rating. There are some practices that have mixed in their literature that could have been eligible based on other literature sources, but were not eligible based on the physical effects rating.
Is that consistent with what OWEB is finding through other programs? Surprised that you're not seeing reduced grazing to specific standards rating higher than that. I know NRCS, for example, is financing many projects around the nation with stubble height specifics delineated.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, but one, Russ, I don't think the practice is called reduced grazing. I think it's prescribed grazing. And I do think it qualifies for some other of the environmental benefits, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Barbara?
Yeah, so it's in I just pulled up the table we have in the, that does a crosswalk. So prescribed grazing is one of the ones listed in the Climate Action Commission. It's slight to moderate. So it ranks as a 2 in the physical effects. So yeah.
Jim Bob, you have a comment?
Can you overlap this with CREP as far as like when we're doing the riparian buffer zone and stuff, and we're going in and we're planting all those things? Would this be a program that you can actually overlap with CREP to help it work together?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And part of our statutory obligation with these funds is that they aren't duplicative of existing conservation programs that are out there. And so this has been designed to work in parallel with CREP or EQIP or CSP, so on and so forth. So you could potentially have a CREP project and then if it's part of your conservation management plan as well, be getting the OAHP payments in conjunction with your CREP payments. So we would be leveraging the federal dollars. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. I mean, it's so okay. Maybe I need some more clarification. So you're saying you could actually do a CREP plan and planting through CREP dollars, and then also because you did this at the beginning of your design phase for like doing stream restoration, you could also pair that with this, so you got rewarded for doing the planting, because years later it would show the effects of the growth of the vegetation. Is that correct? Or no?
Yes. I mean, it's designed to be paired with potentially with federal dollars. So just because you're participating in CREP, our program is going to be somewhat agnostic on that front. It'd be, great if it's paired, but what we're paying for is the ecosystem service, and CREP muddies the water a little bit. It's a little bit easier to think about for me with EQIP, where EQIP is paying for the cost to implement specifically the conservation practice, and then the CMP program will be paying for the ecosystem service associated with the implemented practice. With CREP, it is a little more convoluted because I think those rental payments might be based on, but actually those rental payments are based on the going rate of that piece of farm ground, is my understanding.
It's based on it's trying to be an estimate for what you're grazing, what it would cost you to graze that. I mean, it's
right.
It's not, of course, we're doing 10, 15-year contracts, so it doesn't keep up with it at all. But it does exist to really offset not grazing in that fenced area. But the idea of which the outcome is the benefit for the environment. What it is, a curious idea is to say, you're going to get paid not to graze this, and this program would pay you for the large wood that grew inside that, because that is not really equated into that. You're just being paid not to graze, which it generates that extra vegetation because of that. But then also you're getting, they'll buy the plants and pay to have the plants put in. But that's also I've had guys argue that, well, that's going to take away grazing when I decide to come out of this program. And with this in mind, it's saying no, you're going to get paid because it's still creating good habitat in that, and you're protecting that habitat, and you're creating that buffer for it. On top of you being paid not to graze, you're also going to get paid for the benefit of it, which it's double dipping in a sense, but it's also kind of acknowledging that even though you're not getting paid exactly the fair rate of the grazing practice per acre in that, you are being rewarded for doing good practices, which is kind of like what that NRCS program that for 5 years you would do a list of different conservation acts. Anyhow, that didn't matter if you were already doing them, you were getting rewarded for doing it, which I'm always a fan of being rewarded for doing good work instead of having someone that's doing terrible work and then being persuaded into doing good work. It feels kind of like a cell phone company rewarding you with a new phone, even though you're a long-term customer type mentality. But anyhow, sorry.
No, that's super helpful. And I think it helps clarify kind of one of the goals of the methodology is to be paying folks what they're actually delivering on the ecosystem service front, as opposed to like you're describing with some of the USDA programs, you're being paid for what either the cost to implement the practice or the cost to you for not implementing a certain practice.
Right. And I like the idea that you're going to come in and test it years later and you're going to get paid on that. So it's going to be well, you've been doing this for a while since we started this program. Now we're going to have an element here to measure the stored carbon or soil health or things like that. So you're not necessarily getting paid up front for that, but you are being rewarded for it how long is this before you come in and actually test that to see if it has changed? We're talking about 5 years. What is the timeline on that? I guess I should say.
So we're not actually proposing doing testing. So that's where you were talking about a little bit earlier about it's practice-based and it's based on projected outcomes, but not actual on-the-ground monitoring. Particularly so carbon would be the easiest, but even carbon, it can be very costly to do accurate testing. And so both from a cost perspective and a landowner perspective, we're not proposing at this point doing monitoring.
And Jim, just this add on to that, the conservation management plan grant program has 3 components. So we can pay for the development, the implementation, and the monitoring. We're focusing on getting the development and implementation of these plans going, and then we can develop our monitoring protocol after we have some plans in place that are actually on the ground and going.
Okay, yeah, because
prioritize getting some work done on the ground.
Taylor, if I could interject here, I think we should try to let Barbara get through her presentation so we don't get bogged down in the questions before we get through that, and then we can get bogged down in questions till we run out of time.
Appreciate the facilitation.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm going to go through each of the other two types of payments to get you a sense of the process. And then we'll look at the proposed payments by practice, so you can see the range of values also by practices that are eligible. So this looks at water quality. So water quality, we focused on sediment and nutrients, and we focused on nitrogen of nutrients because from valuing it economically, often nutrients are lumped together. So we didn't want to get double counting by separately looking at nitrogen and phosphorus. So looking at nutrients and sediment, we first quantified based on the literature what the ton per acre or kilogram per acre reduced sediment and nitrogen entering waterways per acre of practice. So quantified that. And because when you have riparian buffers or other types of edge of field practices, they tend to, per acre of that practice, capture more of the sediment and nutrients than an infield acre does because of the drainage area. So the edge of field practices, based on the literature, we're estimating are roughly 20 times as effective per acre of the practice itself. So the values are all times 20 for edge of field practices that qualify for water quality for sediment and that qualify for water quality for nitrogen. So two separate payment systems, one for sediment, one for nitrogen, applied across the eligible practices. And I believe there's 14 total in that far right column of eligible practices for water quality, either sediment or nitrogen. Moving into habitat. Habitat's probably one of the most challenging. We have so many different habitat types across the state. The value of those habitats can vary dramatically depending on lots of different location-specific considerations, even within each habitat type. But that said, we took a variety of methods and came out with $100 to $200 per acre of habitat for the different habitat types. We focused on both terrestrial habitats, and in that we also lumped wetlands, which is a little confusing, but wetlands, the terrestrial part of riparian areas, trees, shrubs, and grassland, shrubland. So those qualify for payments. And then if that habitat type is in a riparian zone and it provides shading to streams, so affecting water temperatures, and also adding the beneficial woody, large woody inputs into the streams, it also has a benefit for aquatic habitat. So NRCS also rates several of these practices as being beneficial for aquatic or stream habitat. So those are also eligible for a separate payment in addition to the terrestrial benefit of the trees and the land in the riparian zone itself, or elsewhere if it's not in the riparian zone. So those get added together, and the maximum habitat payment tells you, $100 for pasture and hay planting and providing grassland habitat there. Riparian trees and shrub get $100 terrestrial, $200 for the streamside benefit for a total of $300, and so on. So we add these together. So there are some practices that provide water quality, carbon, and so the prime example is riparian forest habitat. It provides all 5 of these types of benefits that we've quantified. So the maximum payment, if you have trees or shrubs in the riparian zone on that far right column, is $610 if you add up all of the potential benefits, because it's an edge of field practice, so it gets a higher water quality payment. It provides carbon sequestration. It helps shade streams and provide stream benefits, and it provides terrestrial habitat for birds and other species. If it's not in a riparian zone, trees and shrubs would get $410 because they wouldn't provide that stream shading and riparian aquatic benefit. If it's an infield practice, it could have a maximum of $120 if it provides terrestrial habitat and all these other benefits. So that's kind of how the system works. We look at each benefit type. We look at the value of that benefit type for given the type of practice it is. Is it edge of field? Is it infield? And what is the habitat type being provided? And then we add it up. So this gives a little more mathematical, for those of you that like formulas. I might be the only one that does, but so we look at each of the columns or each of the types of benefits, like in the previous table. We have $9 for sediment, $6 for nutrients, $200 per acre for aquatic habitat in those riparian zones, 100 or 200, depending on which type of other habitat from a terrestrial perspective, and then $5 or $10 for carbon per acre. And then we go through and say for pasture and hay planting, oh, yes, it's eligible for a sediment water quality payment. That's $9. Yes, it's eligible for terrestrial habitat. It's grassland, so it's $100. And it's eligible for carbon, and it's not tree or shrub, so it's $5. So we add those together. Oh, it looks like I missed the carbon payment in my math here. But we add those together and come up with the payment for each of these. So this table is for all carbon eligible practices, the total payments. So on the right-hand side, it tells you, so for example, tree shrub establishment might be riparian or it might not be. So it gives you the value if it's in the riparian zone or if it's not. And the far right column gives you the equip payment per acre. And it's interesting, if you kind of scan through there, the payment for several of them is actually not far off from the cost-based equip payment. But some of them, the equip payment is much more expensive than what we're conservatively estimating these 4 benefit types to be. Similar table for the other eligible practices that don't qualify under carbon. You can see the carbon column is blank for these. We developed the methodology so that it could be hopefully useful for all sorts of different types of funding, not just carbon focused funding. So this gives the estimated current sort of draft estimated payments per practice for the other non-carbon eligible practices. So thanks, Bruce. That was kind of fast. I think I'm running out of time in the presentation, so I wanted to kind of get through it, but would love any other questions people have or comments.
Well, good. In fact, I'm dying to ask a question, and since I'm facilitating this discussion, I can go first, right? So the way that I read this being framed is it's built around the concept that equip could pay for the work to put a practice into place, and that payments under a conservation management plan could pay for the value that generates, the public benefits that it generates, as long as it is in place. And that's why there's a difference between what equip pays, and ours is more like the rental rate to produce that benefit, to sustain that benefit over time, I guess.
Yeah, and the equip, there's no analysis of the benefit from equip. They just look at the cost to implement.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful to me to just separate out cost-based versus benefit-based, and you put them together, and that's what might be appealing to a landowner. Thank you. Other questions?
You're muted, Bruce, but I think you called on Amanda.
I did call on Amanda twice now.
Thank you. I apologize coming into the conversation late, since this is my first meeting. So if any of this has already been discussed, thank you for catching me up to speed on it. Here at Umatilla Reservation, we work pretty closely with NRCS and these equip projects, so I'm fairly familiar with the conservation practices. In the past, we've even gone so far as to complete a First Foods conservation implementation strategy that went so far as to give kind of equip ranking to the cultural value of some of the practices that we were implementing here within the reservation. And I'm wondering, maybe this ecosystem service valuation conversation isn't the best place for this question, but I'm wondering how much that was put into the consideration for this. And I guess I wasn't clear coming into the meeting either, whether we were using this kind of table as the ranking, like the question I asked earlier in terms of, proposal value, or if this was simply to be provided to the land trusts and the operators while they're drafting their proposals for inclusion in their proposal.
So I'll answer the second question first because I think it's easier. I think the second question was, what are these values, like barring the equip values, but the other values in the table? And these are intended to be the payments to if a CMP is approved for funding, the landowner would receive for each of these types of practices if they're included in that CMP. Taylor, do you want to, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, so I mean, basically folks are going to need to propose the development and implementation of a CMP, and then it will go through technical review and ultimately to the commission to decide whether or not to fund the implementation of that conservation management plan. And if the commission chooses to recommend for funding and the board awards the funding, then this is the payment rate, so that folks kind of know that rate going in, and we're not having to be adjusting the dials for each individual project. But they're still going to be subject to review to ensure that they're choosing appropriate conservation practices given the operation and the geography.
But it's not tied to our ranking of the proposals at all.
No, if ultimately the commission recommends them for funding and they're funded by the board, then this is the payment rate for that particular practice.
Yeah, and then to your first question of sort of non-environmental value, but more cultural value of, it sounded like you were asking of more the types of production, like the types of crops that are being grown on the land.
No, I apologize if I wasn't clear. That's okay. There's cultural value tied to some of these conservation practices. For example, on a CREP project, if we went along and planted certain berry species, there's potential in the future, you can't get economic value out of a CREP plan. But now we have established native species that are of cultural significance as well. And so when we've done CIS with NRCS in the past, that has kind of gone into our EQIP project ranking. And I was just wondering if those kind of effects were considered at all in these valuations.
I love that question. I don't like my answer. No is kind of the simple answer. So we were trying as hard as we could to stay within the NRCS physical effects matrix as there's a lot of elements of this methodology that are controversial, and we were trying to stay within here's an objective rating system that's been vetted nationally. It doesn't consider cultural value at all. It's that's not a value that's considered there. To some degree, the terrestrial habitat value has a little bit, but it was really focused on biodiversity in general and not specific cultural values associated with biodiversity within any particular groups of who might value biodiversity for different reasons. So there's a little bit of it with the biodiversity value for habitat. I think that's a great question, particularly given the emphasis for tribes and EJ communities, that could be a separate type of value. I'd be really curious to hear for your tribe how there's a lot of sensitivity often with putting an economic value on a cultural value. So whether that would be even something that you would want to pursue or have us pursue. We've done it from a subsistence perspective. There's different ways you can do it, but they're also controversial.
Sure. And I do caveat that perhaps this isn't the best place for this question, simply because, it is difficult to monetize that kind of service. But I'm just, keeping in the back of my head as we're valuing these kind of projects, you know, reserved treaty rights access, tribal member access to areas for hunting, fishing, gathering. That has, you know, sometimes that gets kind of couched in the recreational value type that I did see referenced in your methodology paperwork. But it was mostly just, you know, a grander question to see how much it had been factored into any of these considerations.
Great question, Amanda.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I think
for
it's
your work
one
on
we
this.
should continue to discuss as a commission, and we could probably take two different approaches. I assume with the CIS approach, you were using the value of that NRCS had established for the EQIP practice and just making sure that the suite of practices that were important to the tribe were included.
Yes.
And so we're lucky. I mean, Barbara and the team have done this analysis for all existing NRCS practices. So if in the future, as we go forward, there are practices that didn't make the cut based on the physical effects criteria that the commission feels really strongly ought to be included, we've done a lot of the legwork that we could, for other reasons, include those practices. So that may be a more straightforward approach going forward.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned this, but so because of the emphasis on carbon, we used a different rating for carbon. It was a 3, 4, or a 5 for water and habitat. We used either a 4 or a 5 only. And if there are practices that are particularly relevant for those cultural values that you're talking about, maybe we change the, you know, maybe the rating system isn't just a 4 or a 5 then to make those practices eligible. Like there's, like Taylor's saying, because we've analyzed all the practices and tried to create the payment system such that any practice, it would be clear what the payment per acre would be. It's flexible for the future to make those kind of modifications. Or we hope it is, at least. That's the aim.
Great. Thank you for answering my questions.
I see Renee and Russ. I don't know what the order, but Renee, did you have something relevant to the immediate discussion or?
It is, Bruce, and I'll be brief, Russ. So one, I think, Amanda, what you just raised relative to the mention I had of the outreach for the natural and working lands funding and the very specific interest in EJ communities and tribal priorities, I think that could certainly come up in the outreach as we're thinking through allocation of that $750,000. And I think, again, like, amazing question. This could be something that, as the commission is serving in the role of the RAC for rule revisions, it could be something that comes up in the context of incorporating, at the direction of the OWEB board, more climate considerations, including local communities disproportionately impacted by climate, and thinking about more durable adaptation, including for human communities. So those could be ways that what Amanda raised could come up in the context of future commission conversations. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Russ?
Barbara, I just want to say that this is clearly cutting edge work. And I'm so excited, not only for Oregon, but I'm hoping that, and this is a question, are you thinking about publishing this work nationally and sharing it? As clearly it's of PhD potential here, but I really think that the benefit to others who struggle with this on a national basis would benefit from this type of, well, just sharing the methodology with them.
You're muted, Barbara.
Thanks, Taylor. Well, thank you for that, Russ. It has occurred to me, particularly as we were putting together all of the sources for it, and I haven't thought through yet what that next step would be, and I think it's really in conversation also with OAHP and the finalization of this and everything too, that what the timing of that might look like. But thank you for that comment.
Any other questions? I have one, but it's not specific to the methodology. It's more, I assume somebody's thinking how we allocate funding for this. We're talking about annual payment rates, and we're operating with funds that come occasionally with no great certainty. So do you allocate funds to a project for a defined period of time and set it aside and meter it out? Or what's the thinking there?
I kind of want to punt this to Renee because it's an ongoing discussion, but
Thanks. Sure, Taylor. I'm happy to take a swing at it. Bruce, that's exactly what we need to work through and struggle through, I think, because on one hand, it is very important to provide certainty to folks if they are engaging with the program and the fits and starts nature of things makes that quite challenging. So these are exactly the types of things that we're going to have to talk through with the commission about our current reality, unless and until, as Stephanie said, OHP funding is incorporated into base budget current service level. But I do think it's going to be quite a tension of how do you not have so much committed in these long-term contracts, but not risk having people be genuinely concerned about engaging with the program because of a lack of certainty for them and their agricultural operation. And frankly, the long-term benefit to the ecosystem too, of running the risk of not having those resources. So I don't have a great answer, but it's absolutely on our minds.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. That was a great presentation, and maybe we'll ask you to, are you being asked to help us think about how to use them to grapple with that question that Renee is talking about? I don't know that there's an economic methodology to that, but there are ways to think about it differently, I think.
I mean, Taylor and I have talked a lot about these kind of more implementation, but that's really up to the commission and OAHP. So I've been less involved, I'd say, with that. Taylor, jump in if you want to add.
yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we don't want to. Barbara's great, but it's the commission and the board that really have the power to decide how we go about implementing. So Barbara's done the legwork, help us understand how we value the practices, and that was her charge. And we can obviously have a discussion and bring Barbara into a discussion around how we go about implementing and setting money aside and the actual program mechanics of getting the money out the door. But that isn't what we hired her to do. So I'm trying to keep her in her lane.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If there's no more immediate questions, we have 15 minutes left in our scheduled agenda here and some important things to cover there. So I turn it back over to the chair.
The chair is muted as well.
How about that? I bet that's way, well, now you got to hear me. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the last agenda item, if everybody's good with that, which is the commission work plan for 2024. And Taylor, you were going to walk us through that.
Yeah, okay. Well, as you'll see in item G of your commission packet, we kind of put together a rough draft of a work plan for the coming year. And was hoping just to use the last few minutes of our meeting to talk through that, get thoughts and buy-in from the commission as to our approach. And then, continue on and do the work. It's going to be a busy year. So coming up in 2024, the big things we have to do is we have to adopt a recommended spending plan. So, we know we're going to have these climate dollars available to us. And if the governor signs the in session bill, then we'll potentially have those other funds available as well. So given that, we'll recommend a spending plan to the board. And then we also need to come back together after we've run any grant solicitations associated with that spending plan and make formal funding recommendations to the board. Staff is also proposing / insisting that we engage in a rulemaking process over the coming years. I think it's really important, one, because we have to incorporate climate evaluation criteria that's been adopted by the board back in July. And also, I think there are quite a few places in the existing rule set, just based on experience standing up the program, that would benefit from some tweaks or clarifications. I think some of the program participants have alluded to those in their public comments at this meeting and in the past. And staff, I think, just from a program administration perspective, have some ideas as to how we might create more clarity, both for us as staff in our role, you as commissioners in your role, and then obviously applicants as they go about trying to implement the program on the ground. So with that, we provided a kind of a rough draft table of a proposed meeting schedule going forward. And so I was just going to kind of walk us through that real quick. I do have some ideas for some tweaks, even since we put this out, and then just get folks' thoughts and see if we can get kind of a consensus as to the approach we're taking over the coming year. So to start off, we've had our meeting today, which was designed to be kind of a reconvening of the commission and an informational dump, for lack of a better word, just to get everybody kind of up to speed on what's been going on. Following this, the board is going to meet in April to amend their spending plan. And so with that amended spending plan, those legislative and funding updates Renee gave earlier in the meeting will be incorporated to the degree feasible into the OWEB spending plan. And then at that point in time, we'll have the ability to set a programmatic spending plan here as a commission. So we're hoping to meet sometime in early May, and I was proposing May 1st, and we can come back and talk about dates after I run through this all, to finalize or to adopt the spending plan, kind of finalize our plan for rulemaking for the year, and then to have Barbara back to give us an update on how she's incorporated any feedback she got from this meeting, and just kind of a final draft of the methodology that we're going to run with in our upcoming CMP implementation. So that's what we're proposing for May. And then I see Renee has her hand up, so I must.
Yeah, Taylor, just one quick amendment to that, because folks listening might be curious. So we cannot set specifics on solicitation for grant cycles until we go through the process of knowing that the funding has been accepted and approved by the OWEB board, that there's a spending plan from the commission. We are certainly hoping by that May 1 proposed meeting that all of that will be clear. You will be setting a spending plan, and we will be articulating very clearly what the grant cycle opening dates are, deadlines are. The one thing to keep in mind is that for anything coming up kind of this spring, if you will, and any future springs, is we have a closed window for our online system, basically from the 1st to essentially the middle of July. So we have to avoid that timing, but we are mindful of the importance of getting one or more solicitations open and getting things moving to get these dollars on the ground. So we will bring that to the commission for consideration once we know the dust has settled with the funding on end of session bill. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's important, Renee. Okay, so coming out of that May meeting, we'll likely open one or more solicitations, and those will be running up until that close window we talked about. So there won't be much work for the commission to do while we're waiting for folks to get their applications in, except for that's when we're proposing that we initiate our rulemaking process. So you'll see in the table, we propose to have 3 rulemaking meetings. A first rulemaking where we kind of present the existing rule set. Staff can walk through some areas where we think the commission ought to spend a little bit of time and energy considering tweaks, gather all that feedback, and then come back to a second RAC meeting where we will work to have incorporated ideas and feedback from the commission into a revised rule set. Again, repeat the process, get the feedback from the commission, come back with a third draft, and hopefully at that third RAC meeting, we could potentially have something that's close to done. And then at our next in-person commission meeting, adopt a formal recommendation for those rule sets in November. So as you'll see, the November meeting, we're proposing to have in person. Unsure where yet, but somewhere of the choosing of the commissions. We might take a little bit of a straw poll here if we have time as to folks' opinions on that. But at that November meeting, obviously we'll finalize our rule recommendations to the OWEB board, and then we'll spend time deliberating and making formal funding recommendations to the OWEB board as to what they ought to fund as far as grants that came into the program. So that's kind of 2024. I mean, there's some things that are going to push out into 2025, and hopefully this program continues to hum down the track, but didn't want to get too far out ahead of ourselves. But I did want to bring us back to the potential May meeting. If you're looking at your board book and the table I provided, we have the date as proposed, May 1st, and the location is in there as in-person/hybrid. And then you'll see the RACs, the Rule Advisory Committee meetings are all in there as virtual. Now, in kind of thinking through what we're actually going to do at the May meeting, which is adopt a spending plan and hear an update from Barbara, and then just kind of initiate a process for rulemaking. That meeting is likely only going to take us 2 hours, maybe 3. And so to ask everyone to, on short notice, to drive halfway across the state might be a lot. So I just want to throw that out there, that we could consider having that meeting virtual and potentially using one of the RAC meetings where we're actually going to be diving into the meat of our rule set as an opportunity to bring the commission together in person, because that we could likely turn into a full day endeavor, because we'll also be kind of going through an update on the Natural and Working Lands funds, our outreach process, and kind of giving the commission an update on timing at that point in time. So with that, 2 considerations for the commission these last few minutes. One, what do we think about May 1st for a meeting? And would we be okay doing it virtual, or do we feel like it's important that it's in person? And I guess a third consideration is, if we do decide to do the early May meeting virtually, would we want to do one or more of the RAC meetings in person instead? So with that, I'll turn it back to Doug to facilitate some feedback on those kind of 3 questions, and we'll work on finalizing a timeline going forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll throw my 2 cents in there first, because I can. The virtual meetings you got, or the in-person ones you have, which is early May and November, both work out good for me personally. The RAC meetings in person are going to be harder for me to make because of harvest times for my crops. So doesn't mean we can't do it, just means it's harder for me. So, and as far as the location for that November meeting, I'd like to see that in Central Oregon, somewhere where it's somewhat centralized. So, Bruce, where are you at on that?
Similar, I think on your last point, Central Oregon in November would be good for me, and that date works. I think the big meeting dates both work. I haven't looked at all the RAC dates there, but I think it's to be expected that not everybody's going to make every meeting. And in terms of the May 1st meeting, I mean, I look at Ed and Amanda and Woody, particularly having long drives, as you say, for maybe a not too long meeting, I think I would be in favor of doing that virtually. If people are comfortable, today is the first time we've tried to do business virtually that I can recall. I think it's worked okay. It's not quite as good as being in person, no question about it, but it's certainly easier for people, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. It's kind of weighing the cost benefit there, because we're going to get folks in person. It'd be nice to have the workload to justify the travel and the hotels and whatnot. But maybe some of our folks who are a little further afield would want to weigh in on the May 1st question. You know, some of you who are further afield are also new, so there's probably a fair amount of value of getting together in person, but we will have that opportunity in November as well. Yeah, Laura, you have a thought?
I just had a question. It looks like July's on a Tuesday and everything else is on a Wednesday. Did you mean to do that?
Probably, yeah, I probably had something on the calendar. I think for the racks, I can poll people. I'll throw out a couple of options. I really want to nail down the May 1st meeting. The rest of them are kind of placeholders, rough dates within a day or two of that.
I like the Wednesdays, just saying.
Okay, that's good. I'll make a note of that. Thanks, Laura. Amanda?
I just wanted to answer Bruce's question with yes, if the May 1st one is only going to be a couple hours long, I would probably appreciate a virtual meeting for that one. In terms of the summer dates, if there is a full day's worth of conversation, I can certainly try and make a trip for one of those as long as I have enough notice, and for the Central Oregon one in November should all work.
Okay, that's super helpful. I saw a thumbs up from Jim Bob on the May virtual approach. Okay. Okay, well, I'm not hearing too much grumbling, at least about making May virtual. So I think I might just take that as close to consensus as we're going to get. And with the racks, Doug, maybe we'll have a conversation about whether or not we try and make one of those racks in person if it feels really important to get together before November. Or we can just, if things are going really well virtually, we can potentially just do all that and actually adopt our rule recommendations in November when we are in person. Bruce?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to, there was a question or comment from Kathleen Ackley in the question answer section way back at the beginning there. And I think I'm really getting at, for potential applicants for potential funding, money we don't have yet, once the governor signs a bill, I think they're trying to figure out, what's the application window looking like? And what I heard from you is it has to be after May 1st when we adopt a spending plan to even put out an RFP, and it has to close by July 1st. Is that? So for Kathleen and anybody else thinking, it probably is a late June deadline for applications.
Those are the constraints we would be operating under, yeah.
Okay, nothing formal yet or official yet,
right?
But if you want to be thinking about those things, that would be the window.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we are at 12:30, so don't want to keep us longer than we have to, but it's your meeting, Doug, so you do what you will.
Okay. And yes, I do get hungry, and it is my lunchtime. But with that being said, I do want people to ask questions if they got them. And so I'll take a minute or two for any questions that are left over here.
Like Ed's got one.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag, the conversation that's happening in the Q&A or the questions. I know Mark had several questions there. We may have answered some in his in our discussion, but yeah, didn't want to ignore those.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ed. Looks like Mark has some questions about the ecosystem services, and we can follow up with him. Mark, if you're listening, we can follow up with you offline and see if we can incorporate your feedback into Barbara's considerations as we're tweaking the methodology.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to handle that. Take those questions offline and answer them. So, Jeff, I see you got your hand up too.
I was just going to say that, yeah, May 1st is actually kind of a busy day for me.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I'm an administrator, I'm a teacher, and so, you know, I can meet in the afternoon. But if it's before 2 o'clock, I probably wouldn't be able to, but that's fine too. I don't, you know, anyway.
Yeah, no, I
Somebody's always
appreciate
busy,
that.
so.
Is it every day after 2, or is there a day?
Just in the spring term here at OSU, you know, it's just I just have a lot going on this spring, so it's just kind of typical for, yeah.
Is there a day of the week, or are they all pretty much?
Well, the day before I have absolutely nothing. So, you know, Tuesday, the April 30th, and completely open. But yeah, May 1st, I can, I don't know, I can cancel a class or something, or find a guest lecture. I don't know. I can make it work, but, or, you know, it all depends. Generally I'm pretty open, but it's just, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's super helpful. It's like I said, it's always a challenge to get a bunch of busy people in the same room at the same time, even if it's virtual. Does anyone have a conflict the afternoon of the 30th that they know of offhand? Because I mean, we could just shoot for that instead. Okay.
Doesn't sound like there's any quick.
Okay. Well, you know what I'll do? I'll send out a quick poll anyway with a couple of options and just see where we can get the most people. I was just hoping to hone in on a couple of times, and it sounds like we're there. So thanks for that.
Well, good. Anything else? Questions, comments? If not, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. I want to thank everybody for participating today. I think it worked really well. And Taylor, thanks a lot for you and your the staff there for getting this all put together. And we'll look forward to a meeting coming up here into April, 1st of May.